Okay, it's an enormous pleasure to be in Liverpool on this quite sunny day.
It's
my
nice.
good friend Michael Hoey. Now, Mike, I wanted to talk to you about your early work at the University of Birmingham.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The work that was done at the University of Birmingham in the 1970s, would you say?
Well, some work was done at the very beginning of the 1970s, but the dominant work was done from about 1980 onwards.
Okay, but that was very early work in corpus linguistics, especially with reference to lexicography, I guess.
Yeah. It was the lexicography I was thinking of. I mean, John Sinclair did work actually, I think 1970, with a couple of collaborators, which I think probably was the first ever computationally driven account of, or computationally driven evidence for collocation.
I thought it was called the Osty report.
It was indeed
Yeah,
the Osty
yeah.
report, yeah. I mean, for a while it was out of print, and I treasured 6 copies I'd made of it. At one point, I think there were the only 6 copies apart from the original left.
Right.
But I believe it's now been republished and
Good.
probably can be downloaded on the internet.
Well, if it's on the internet, not on the cloud, it's fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's so dangerous that the thing almost became extinct. There was just 6 copies left.
It was very, very close to being lost. Yeah.
So there was this early work at Birmingham in corpus linguistics. Could you maybe tell us about how you became involved in it? John Sinclair obviously was important.
Yeah, I mean, John Sinclair had been a chief consultant to Collins for dictionaries, and obviously had been working as I mean, we use the word pioneer fairly cavalierly, but he really was a pioneer, along with Geoffrey Leach.
Absolutely.
Probably the 2 of them created the discipline as we now know it. And I was appointed in 1979 as the English Language Research Officer, which was, looking back on it, it was an extraordinarily daring move on their part, because I wasn't probably appropriate for it. But secondly, because the post itself was very brave for an English department to be appointing someone whose sole role was to generate research projects.
Right.
I had no other role. I had no teaching responsibilities. Obviously I was expected to carry on doing my own research, but that wasn't actually the prime function. My function was to generate research proposals.
Right.
And I worked in the early months, first year, on a number of different projects, some of which got looked at seriously, some of them didn't. But the one that did run, and obviously I was doing it on behalf of the whole team. It wasn't that I was to, without of my own, massive intellect, generate large quantities of research projects.
Well, actually,
I was just a servant to
the truth of the matter, in those days, it was very difficult to do corpus linguistics on your own.
Yeah,
you
right.
needed a team of people
Absolutely.
with all sorts of different skills,
Absolutely.
including programming, to be able to do any of it. So I take your point.
Yeah. So I was just a servant to the team, but in that context, we ran a pilot study on what a dictionary might look like. And at the end of that pilot study, enough had been done to show that a corpus-driven study might work. And I was then entrusted with writing the proposal to Collins and getting the budget for it. So in one sense, but of course, having just said I was a servant to the team, you all understand that I'm not really claiming to have been the person who designed the proposal. But nevertheless, I did actually write the proposal. And then Sue Atkins, John Sinclair's sister, who was also a distinguished lexicographer in her own right, co-wrote it with me. So she took my draft and we wrote it. We then wrote it again to make sure that it would cover all the bases that Collins were interested in. She had knowledge of that. So the final proposal that landed the Collins Cocoa Dictionary, Sue, or sometimes known as Aaron Atkins, and I wrote together.
Right.
And then I found myself being taken out of my role as English Language Research Officer in the general terms, because what John Sinclair said was, well, with this one, because it was in 1980-81, had a budget of over £1 million.
That was a lot of money.
A lot of money. And in their arts,
Absolutely.
pretty well unheard of.
Yeah. Well, to put that in perspective, I think when I had a conversation with Jeff about building the Lob Corpus, which was only a few years before that, he had a budget of £20,000. So £1 million was a hell of a lot of money.
A hell of a lot of money. And indeed, the university got extremely jumpy. The finance office was more nervous than I've ever seen a finance office. They were very scared. They thought the damage that could be done to the university if it failed was so huge.
Yes.
You know,
£1 million black hole.
£1 million black hole would be a very dangerous thing to have. So essentially, I was taken off the English as the English language research officer and became an assistant to the project.
Right.
And I became part of a small management team of the project, John running it.
Yeah.
Antoinette Renouf was appointed as the initial editor of it.
Yeah.
And Jeremy Clear was a very bright man who then went into teaching. So we've lost him as a linguist, though I don't doubt lots of pupils have benefited from him.
Great.
But he was the computer officer, and I was there as a kind of odds and sods man, really.
Yeah.
We ran it for about 2 years, and then after that Antoinette was put in charge of a second project that was being developed, which was developing a corpus of English language teaching materials, and I became a consultant to the project.
I remember you telling me once how difficult it could be at times to convey to lexicographers this new approach to building dictionaries.
Yes, I mean, it was
in that way.
There were three things that, in a sense, the lexicographers we appointed fell into three camps, and it was very interesting working with them. The one camp were those who had been lexicographers before and were coming on to, as it were, another dictionary project. The second were people who were straight linguists, people just interested in language. And the third camp was made up of people who were, a small camp, made up of people who were non-native speakers and therefore brought an interest in the language and also a kind of separate perspective. Yeah. And it was interesting that the only one of those three groups that really worked was the middle group.
Right.
And that's not critical at all of the people involved, and lots of people did a lot of very important hard work and brought themselves up to speed, and not in any way whatsoever disparaging the very important work they all did. But those who come from another project had to be dissuaded from using their old methods. It's very difficult to, if you become a really good tennis player, to suddenly be told, actually, you're
playing badminton now.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to do different arm movements.
Yes.
And in at least one case, someone who I had a lot of respect for, who was a very good lexicographer in the traditional sense, left after about a year of his own volition. I mean, we were obviously happy to continue working with him, but he recognised that he wasn't ever going to feel comfortable with what we were doing, and he left and went on to do other work, including little dictionaries. But crucially, the traditional method was you looked at the word, you introspected heavily, you looked at what other dictionaries had done. So you would have 3 or 4 dictionaries in front of you as well, just to check what they'd done. And the combination of what they'd done plus what you introspected would then enable you to come up with a definition with an example which would be made up, but drawing on your experience. Right. And then any other comments you had to make. And it's quite interesting looking at Hornby's dictionary. Hornby was a remarkable man, and again, absolutely no intent whatsoever to disparage him. The very fact that he conceived of the idea of an advanced learner's dictionary was itself a very, very important step being taken. So don't hear me as being mean about the man. Because he couldn't have done any differently anyway at the time. There weren't the computer resources to do anything else. But if you look at the entries in that, and then compare them with what is in any of the corpus-driven dictionaries that have been produced co-build and post-co-build, there's not much match.
Yeah.
I have occasionally given papers where I've taken an entry from one of the pre-co-build dictionaries and then taken an entry from the post-co-build dictionary and looked at the difference. One of the big differences is the sense division is different, but also the main focus in the old stuff was on the definition.
Yeah.
And the example would be an example which did a little more than illustrate that it really did mean what it was said it would mean. Whereas in the post-co-build dictionaries, the examples are where the meat lie, because they tell you the collocations and semantic associations and so on and so forth.
And you can rank the senses by observed.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was very. So that group had difficulties, and unexpectedly, the non-natives also had difficulties. And that wasn't predictable. Certainly plenty of my best PhD students have been non-natives, in fact most of them. So there's nothing whatsoever to say that a non-native can't do corpus linguistic work. But what was missing appeared to be sensitivity to the pragmatics, that kind of feature.
Yeah, language and use. Did the success of co-build come as a surprise to you? Because it was a new venture, it was a bold venture, you obviously had invested in it, you thought that this was a good idea, and somebody else had invested rather a lot of money in it, but it was enormously successful and incredibly influential. Did that surprise you at all? Because given the experience you've had with some of the lexicographers, perhaps you might have thought that some people might reject the idea.
I think to be honest, we were all sailing with a wing and a prayer. And while we did it, the greatest problem, there were two major problems. One was that the pilot study hadn't really thrown up the sheer time it would take to train lexicographers and to get good entries. And the second problem was it took a long while, in those days, it took a long while to create a corpus. We had to take over the whole computing services of the University of Birmingham. For 3 weekends. We closed down every project in the university and made use of every computer. I mean, anyone today thinking that, using their laptop would find this a weird concept anyway. But and we had to do it, when we tried to do it the first weekend, the whole system crashed. And we had to do it in little blocks, 1.5 million words at a time. So creating the corpus in the first place and then processing the corpus, building great delays. So we weren't, while we were doing it, thinking very much about what a success would be.
We were thinking of tomorrow,
and we were really worrying about whether or not we'd get it out. And Patrick Hanks, who was the second editor of it, did a tremendous job actually of bringing it in more or less on time. Near the end of it all, we certainly knew we discovered some very important things about language. Every word we looked at, collocations,
told a new story.
New story. And John Sinclair formulated a rule that if you're going to have 2 senses in a dictionary, there must be at least one collocation that doesn't occur in one of the senses but does occur regularly.
So that's a sort of crucial litmus test.
And from that you can build in all sorts of stuff. I mean, my own work on what I call the drinking problem syndrome, where you get 2 senses avoiding each other, collocations and grammar and so on. It all grows from that. So that was one thing we discovered. The other thing was that we used to have these most amazing workshops where we would, and Jeremy Clare is definitely was the brain behind this, where he would throw a word up on the screen and you were from a text, but it was the only word you had, and you had to make predictions before what would come before and what would come after. And we were noticing that in probably 4 out of 5 occasions the word was almost 100% predictable or 80% predictable or predictable from a narrow and very well-defined set of choices. And then they'd suddenly hit a space where, a point when all bets are off.
Yeah.
And John Sinclair's idiom principle grew directly out of that. So we knew we were discovering stuff. What we didn't know is how the world would take it.
Yes.
And I think by the time it came out, we were confident it was a good piece of work. I mean, the team of lexicographers were excellent, and almost all of them went on to do important work. I mean, Michael Randall, for example, went on to work with Longmans, and then went from Longmans to Macmillan. Gwyneth Fox, who was took over from Patrick, went and became a senior advisor again to Macmillan's. Patrick himself went to Oxford.
Yes.
So they were almost like the early church with the apostles going out, and they, you know, wherever they go, the faith is found. That's right. And wherever they went, a dictionary would be transformed.
Yes.
And we've now got, I think, I would argue that whole set of dictionaries, and of course Coe-Bill takes pride of place as the first and the progenitor, equals in its intellectual achievement the Oxford English, and that those two at both ends of the century, the Oxford English and the Coe-Bill and rivals at the end of the century, between them represent the greatest linguistic work that was done into linguistics generally.
They sort of nicely bookend the century of
They do indeed, but it's quite interesting that we always talk about the grammarians, and we always talk, and there are some great grammarians, Michael Halliday is superb and does all sorts of exciting things, but nevertheless, actually, we've overlooked the fact that some of the greatest linguistic work of all time, and I mean of all time, not just of the last 100 years, has been done by lexicographers. In the one case, in Oxford, making a meticulous record of the way words have developed over the centuries, and in the other case, looking at the context the words occur in, and then rethinking them.
Well, I find it very hard to disagree with that. So I think that's a good point to stop. That was wonderful, and thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.